Psychoanalysis, affect turned inwards. One of the fundamental facts in psychoanalysis is the fact of movement of affect. There are a few fundamental facts about psychoanalysis. The fact of the unconscious, the fact of the law of association, the fact of defenses, and the fact of movement of affect, and the fact of conversion of a traumatic event or a traumatic complex into a symptom. These are some of the fundamental facts in psychoanalysis. One of these very fundamental facts is the fact of affect turned inwards. This fact of affect turned inwards is a specific instance of movement of affect. If affect could not move from one object to another object, there would be no question of displacement, no question of transference, no question of projective identification. Because affect can move and move in various ways, intrapsychically, interpersonally, in the group area also, because affect can move, a complete range of psychological phenomena take place. Each of these phenomena need not necessarily be pathological. It's a range of all events, pathological, normal, supernormal. In all the three categories of events, the movement of affect is seen. One specific movement of affect is affect turned inwards. You can have affect moving sidewards, what you would call displacement. You would have affect moving outwards in expression, or affect moving outwards pathologically in projective identification. You can have affect moving from one to another inside the mind, substitution. So one essential movement, one special movement, or one significant movement of affect is affect turning inwards. And what does that mean? Affect inside the system, we can look at in two ways. One, affect which is generated inside the system and remains inside the system. It was never meant to go towards any person outside. And then you have affect which is generated, which was meant to be expressed towards somebody or in a particular way in the environment, which could not be expressed because of reality or morality or both together. And therefore, the affect which was to go in a particular direction outwards turns inwards. So this is a special movement of affect. So if we look at affect inside the system, you can have affect which is just locked inside the system, and affect which was going outwards, which is now turning inwards, or which was supposed to go outwards, turns inwards. So one quantum, one part of the blocked affect is the affect turned inwards. This inwards we can understand in two ways. One, in a ordinary sense, it was to go towards somebody in the outside world, turns inside. In a more subtle object relations context, this becomes more of an intrapsychic play also. Apart from interpersonal, it becomes intrapsychic but interobject. So when we talk of intrapsychic interobject situation, affect was to go towards a particular object but turns back on one's own object representation. So this is a very important phenomena of affect turned inwards. It has implications for well-being, implications for quality of life, implications for psychopathology, and implications on a social scale. And so this phenomena, which is very important in psychoanalysis, affect turned inwards, it's a very important, very potent, very eventful phenomena. Into the discussion now. Human beings generate far more affect than they can express or healthily handle. This brings into question the affect life cycle. If you look at the affect life cycle, step 1 would be generation of affect. Step 2 would be expression of affect. Step 3 would be what cannot be expressed has to be regulated. So the defensive work on the affect would begin. Some of the affect can get sublimated. Some of them can be put into action. And then step 4 will be the excess affect. That of all the affect generated, a part, let us say, X is the volume of affect generated, quantum of affect generated. Out of X, A is expressed, B is worked upon by defenses, C is the excess affect which cannot be worked over by defenses. And this C, which is the excess affect, will find some pathological expression. And obviously, we are talking about negative effects. So it will find some pathological expression, and that can create psychological symptoms or psychosomatic sicknesses. So this is the whole affect life cycle. And of course, the last step would be wherever the affect is blocked, you release the affect so that the symptom or the psychosomatic sickness can be healed. This affect life cycle is one way to conceptualize the affective subsystem of the whole psychic system. So we look into the affect life cycle. Affect is generated, part of it expressed. That part which cannot be expressed is worked upon by defenses. That part which cannot be regulated by defenses is the excess affect, which goes into creation of symptoms or psychosomatic sicknesses. The excess affect that we are referring to also is a function of the containing capacity. If containing capacity is full, the defensive work is easier to do and excess effect is not there. So when we talk of defensive regulation, one of the important components there is the containing capacity. Second important element, of course, is the strength of the ego to operate the defenses. Because the strength of the defenses is a function of the strength of the ego. So we start off from the affect life cycle and we say affect generated, some part expressed, other part worked upon by defenses. Still some affect is left over. Defenses, the defensive work cannot handle it. So that is the excess affect. Now this excess affect can move in a variety of pathological ways. One way is to turn inwards. If it moves, let us say outwards, let us say anger, excess anger moves outwards, it will lead to violent behavior. It will lead to sadistic behavior. But if it moves inwards, it takes a completely different form. It creates a very different pathology. So we are today focusing on one particular movement of affect turned inwards. And this affect is the excess affect after the defensive work is done. First person to talk about affect turned inwards in a very persuasive way and very strong and resolute way was Freud himself. Freud elaborately describes in Warning and Melancholia that when a narcissistically cathected object is lost, all the emotions towards that object, they are about to lose the subject, but they cannot lose the subject because substitution cannot take place because of the narcissistic nature of the relationship. Because the loss is too difficult to deny, because it's a narcissistic relationship, because the attachment is very high, the only way the psyche can deal with the loss is to internalize that lost object and identify with it and make it one's own. So the lost object now is a part of oneself. But in this process of managing the loss, all the emotions which were towards that object which is lost, they now turn inwards because the object is taken in, and along with that object, the emotions which were towards the object, they follow it almost like a cruise missile, which is locked on to a target. So all the emotions towards those objects, which are that object which is now internalized and identified with and made one's own, all those emotions now turn inwards because the object is inwards. Emotions are still towards the same object. It is just that the location of object changes and the emotions follow that target. And this turning inwards, Freud said, especially of the emotion of anger, is the cause of depression. So for Freud, one of the prime reasons of depression was the anger turning inwards. So affect turning inwards, a specific case of which was anger turning inwards, was first elaborated by Freud. If we see psychosomatic journals on psychosomatic sicknesses, we see how repressed affect can create psychosomatic sicknesses and how affect turn inwards also is one of the prime reasons for psychosomatic sicknesses. In the contemporary discourse, apart from the literature in the psychosomatic area, we also have therapies like ISTDP, EDT, emotion-centered therapies, which are primarily based upon catharsis and consequent restructuring. In these therapies, many of them video record the sessions. Very empirically, they establish that affect turn inwards is one of the main causal agents of psychological or psychosomatic troubles. Let us now go a step specific and look at if affect turns inwards, what are the pathological situations they give rise to. So here we are looking at negative affects which turn inwards. In reality, any affect can turn inwards, even positive affect can turn inwards. It is a myth that we can express our positive affects completely. That is not true. Even in case of positive affects, a part is expressed, a part is acted upon by defenses, and a part of it can turn inwards and go into the system. However, the pathologies that we deal with usually are caused by negative affects. So let us go into that part. The first 5 are affects. 6 and 7, some will call events, not affects. Whatever be the definitional status, these are 7 very important entities. Let us look at some examples. Anger turned inwards can easily lead to depression. Anger turned onto a specific organ can lead to some forms of diabetes. Pain turned inwards mostly leads to psychosomatic problems. Some cases of arthritis, some cases of low blood pressure, some cases of asthma. Envy, uncontrolled envy turning inwards. Envy, if there is excess envy that cannot be dealt with and it turns outwards, you get into destruction of that object. While envy turning inwards can lead to cognitive thought disturbances, what Bion calls attacks on linking. Because you cannot attack the object of envy, you attack the psychological apparatus which brings the news of the object of envy, which is unbearable to know. So the feelings are so unbearable that thoughts which can excite those feelings have to be destroyed. The suffering is unbearable. And if thought leads to suffering, that thought has to be destroyed. Shame. Deep-seated shame can lead to narcissistic behavior. Deep-seated shame can also lead to avoidance. Deep-seated shame can also lead to loss of tone of the muscle. Fear, anxiety. It can lead to very high heartbeats, palpitation. It can lead to breathing troubles. It can lead to diarrhea. It can lead to phobia. It can lead to generalized anxiety disorder. Excessive greed can lead to hoarding. It can lead to antisocial robbery and plunder. It can lead to there is a difference between greed and envy, because in a way both are related to something good outside of us. But there is a difference between the two. Greed is more driven by possessiveness and emptiness, while the envy is more driven by inability to withstand the good and narcissism. Some narcissism is there in greed also. Inferiority, deep-seated, can lead to personality disorders involving avoidance, dependence, narcissism, histrionicity. So all these are effects which are generated and cannot be fully felt and allowed to let go, cannot be fully expressed. And therefore, many of them turn inwards and cause pathological difficulties. Can positive effects also turn inwards? They can. It is just that in psychoanalysis, we have not studied them enough. We are obsessed with the negative. Somebody can put a question: if anger turned inwards is depression, if pain turned inwards is depression, is the opposite of that true, that happiness turned inwards is mania? Some would say mania is expression of too high happiness generated. So the problem in mania, some would say, is happiness turned inwards. Some will say it is too much of happiness being expressed and the defensive work cannot be done. So first, there is a problem at the generation stage. Too much is generated. Second, at the regulatory stage, cannot be regulated. And then there is disproportionate to norm expression. So is it happiness turned inwards? It is more like happiness beyond regulation. Part of it can be because of turned inwards, but largely it is because the regulatory framework cannot hold the amount of effervescence generated. So there is a mood aspect of mania, of happiness and effervescence. Sorry, of happiness. There is a energy aspect of mania, the effervescence and the energy. And there is a defensive aspect of mania where the defenses are suspended. The defenses at the service of ego and superego, they get suspended partially, and it is the id which takes over. So there is a structural aspect to mania also. So there are three aspects: the mood aspect, the energy aspect, and the defensive aspect. But can positive effects turn inwards? Yes, they can. Do they produce exactly the same results? Most of the time it happens. If negative effects turning inwards can cause symptoms, obviously positive effects turning inwards will lead to more health and healing. It also leads to an enhanced psychological immunity. So this curative and preventive aspect of positive effects has not been adequately studied and used by psychoanalysis, because we are usually obsessed with the negative. It's a very gloomy science in one way, a very masochistic science. We can't think of, we talk of catharsis, of release of negative effect, but is there a counterpart of catharsis on the positive side? Release of positive effects. We don't have that kind of term, we don't have that kind of studies. So if we were to speculate and from the word catharsis, create a word catharsis, which is release of positive emotions, happy emotions. And from the word catastrophic thinking, if we were to create a positive equivalent of catastrophic thinking, that journey on those lines is yet to be done. It's a very productive and inviting journey, and a very useful journey it will be, but yet to be done. One of the reasons why it has not been done is we never thought of trying to control pathology by counterbalancing in affective terms, which is to say, if there are too many negative effects in the unconscious, can we try to balance it by creating a counterbalancing positive effect? That route has not been adequately explored, adequately tried out. And because the counterbalancing route has not been tried out, we have not tried out concepts of catharsis and catastrophic thinking. A very important concept here which we can learn from comes from the Eastern sciences, Hindu spirituality. And in Hindu spirituality, shares something common with psychoanalysis, and that is true of all spiritual schools and all psychological schools. All spiritual schools and all psychological schools have something in common. They are all enterprises of self-knowing and self-transformation. This is common to all schools of psychology, all schools of spirituality. Central enterprise is of self-knowing and self-transformation. On this journey, in Hindu spirituality, there are three broad approaches. First approach is to start from the higher and move towards the lower. Start with the positive. So strengthen the positive part of oneself and then open up the difficult part of oneself. In chakra terms, it is said, first strengthen the higher three chakras and then move slowly towards the lower chakra. So move top down. Second approach is to start from the center, which is the heart chakra, and first develop the capacity to love, the capacity to relate, the capacity to feel, and then move higher and then lower, or if somebody can, then from center you can move towards the higher and lower together, or in rare cases center to low to high, but usually it is center to high to low, or center to both high and low. This is the second approach. The first approach is more common in Ashtanga Yoga. The second approach is more common where the psychic is to be found first. Let us say in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, this would be one of the central premises. And the third would be to move from lower to the higher. This is usually a risky path of first opening the lower and difficult parts of oneself, the lower chakras. And this is taken up in some forms of Kundalini Yoga, some forms of Tantra, and psychoanalysis also moves the same way. And this is the riskiest of the three alternatives on which we are moving. So first in psychoanalysis, we are dealing with aggression, sexuality, power. We are dealing with all the lower affects, lower emotions. So because we are obsessed with the negative in a sense, we move that way. The prime approach is from lower to the higher. In fact, it is lower to the central. Psychoanalysis does not go much in strengthening or expanding on the higher aspects of the self. And that vacuum has been taken up by positive psychology. So there is now a space of psychology, a school of psychology, positive psychology, which essentially is into this strengthening of the higher and some part of center, leaving the lower and its vicissitudes and its science to psychoanalysis. In that sense, both put together, psychoanalysis and positive psychology, they create a more complete but yet incomplete structure of approach to the human psyche. Let us now look at the causality of affect turned inwards. Freud talked about the movement of affect, and he mentioned affect moving in all directions. There was affect turned inwards, affect turned sidewards, affect turned outwards. Affect turned inwards in terms of causality for Freud was essentially the cause was inability to accept the pain of loss and undergo the mourning process. Because the pain is unbearable, mourning cannot be done. Therefore, the only way to deal with the loss is to make the object one's own. And in that process, affect turns inwards. So for Freud, the causality of affect turn inwards, in case of depression at least, if not universal, but in the case of depression at least, and depression also we are referring to anger caused depression, anger-centered depression, not pain-centered depression or guilt-centered depression or reality-centered depression. So here in Freud's case of explaining depression as anger turned inwards, the cause of affect turning inwards essentially is inability to bear pain of loss in the outer world. Second cause of why affect would turn inwards is because of early life object loss, which can often lead to a personality disorder. And here what happens is the affect generated, negative affect generated because of object loss is so high that most of it is acted upon by defenses leading to pathological solutions, which are the personality disorders, but a part of the affect remains unaddressed and which turns inwards. Third is repressive or punitive environment, either that in the family or school or office. In this case, because of the environment, the affect turns inwards. There is no other way for the affect to go. There can be a socio-economic or cultural aspect to it. Lower in the socio-economic or cultural hierarchy, more affect has to turn inwards. Less is the scope for expression. There is also a historical aspect to it. Communities which have been brutalized for centuries, like the Hindu community or the Jewish community, because of the historical experiences of Holocaust, both of them, and other brutal historical events, the community learns not to express affect, but to turn more and more affect inwards. So there is a historical aspect to the affect turning inwards is also there. In any society, especially in developing and underdeveloped societies, there is a social hierarchy also involved. Negative affect is expressed by the higher part of the society on the lower strata of the society, and it passes on down the hierarchy to the bottommost part of the hierarchy, where from where it is nowhere to go. So at the bottom of the society, the aggression or any other negative effect which is pushed downwards, that accumulates, and then at the bottom of the society, either people show it to each other in the same social segment. Often it happens the aggressions finally goes into women and children of the lowest strata, or it is deflected onto another group, which leads to social violence. In that sense, when affect turned inwards becomes too much to bear, then the only way out is a catharsis on a social scale. And that is war or group violence. It is like a social scale ISTDP, but there is no portrayal. It is expression in reality, a real acting out, and a real event in reality. So we see that the affect turned inwards on a social scale has aspects of group violence, war linked to it. In that sense, what we are discussing is a phenomena of global significance, of humanitarian significance, even at the civilizational level. A natural question comes up, is then the solution to so much of affect turning inwards, or even more fundamental solution at the level of affect generation, is it to cultivate reality acceptance? We have to be clear here that reality acceptance, like all other ideas, is a contextual idea. It's not a universal ideal. First, reality acceptance, even if we accept as an ideal, it is not always possible to do reality acceptance. It is dependent on the capacity of the person and the trauma and the affect involved we are talking about. If the trauma is too difficult, affect is very high, capacity is low, will is absent, in that case, reality acceptance is practically not possible. It remains an ideal. In reality, it is not possible for a very big group of patients and individuals. Reality acceptance is also criticized as being a utilitarian instrumental idea which essentially is aiming at conformity, sanctioning the importance of the person who accepts, who gets into reality acceptance, and essentially it is a status quoist idea. So there is this criticism of reality acceptance as being for conformity, to cover up the importance, and a status quoist idea. Marx said it very eloquently. He said, philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. And the moment we talk about creating a better world, we are not content with reality acceptance. We are moving beyond it. On a social scale, reality acceptance would mean accepting the society as it is, which would be very comfortable to those at the top and torturous for those at the bottom. Will Durant, one of the greatest historians ever, he says something very interesting. He says, in any society, the rich and the powerful want peace and stability for the same reasons for which the poor want violence and change. That is true for any society, and therefore reality acceptance there is not necessarily an ideal position. In fact, in many situations, reality acceptance and stability are the worst perpetuators of human suffering. And that is what it is. And so, to answer the question, is reality acceptance then a cure to excessive affect generation of the negative type, and thereafter the consequent consequences of pathological outpouring of excess negative affect? Three responses. First, if someone can and wants to, a very good and easy situation. But reality acceptance, although psychoanalysis tries to position this as an ideal, it is neither ideal nor a universal ideal. And on a social scale, in many social situations, it is not only not an ideal, it can become a perpetuator of human suffering. So reality acceptance has to be very contextually practiced if it is taken up as a cure for affect turning inwards. Is then affect turning inwards, if taken on a larger global social scale, a civilizational issue? Of course it is. Can it be stopped? Can it be cured? In normal sense of the word, no. If we have a steady general run of the human civilization, in the state of the general run of the human civilization, no. It's a part of the human condition, it's a part of the human drama. That excess affect will be generated. Some part of it cannot be handled. It goes into either violence or some acting out of the pathological type. partly can go into symptoms, partly can go into psychosomatic sickness. In that sense, the generation and onward non-management and leading to something pathological is an inseparable part of the human drama. It's a part of the human condition. Over a period of history, has it been tackled in some way, partially, if not completely? Yes. Modernity has tried to deal with affect turning inwards. And in a generic way, we can conceptualize to say, frustration of desire leads to anger, and some part of anger will turn inwards. And that is true for all other effects. Frustration of desire will lead to negative effects, and some part of that will turn inwards. Has modernity succeeded? Not completely, not even partially, but the score is not zero, something better than before. So on a something better than nothing, modernity is much better than the pre-modern situations. But is it a solution? No. Is it a half solution? No. Is it a quarter solution? No. It is a less than a quarter solution. The two world wars and continuing brutality across, continuing suffering, exploitation, and inhumanity across, we can all see. So this is not even a quarter solution. Now that modernity is about to get into a termination phase, we are into the closure of modernity period. Post closure of modernity period, if we enter into the age of digitality, does it have a solution to it? Slightly better than modernity, but not really. Even digitality is not even a quarter solution. Possibly, is it possible we may enter into a gene period after the digital revolution period? And in the gene revolution period, say somewhere from 2035 onwards, when the genetic sciences become mature and get an industrial scale applicability, can we expect a better dealing of, better management of affect turning inwards? It is a possibility. If the gene age fails us, we will be back to spirituality as the only way to manage negative affect turning inwards. And we'll be back to ordinary history. It is a tragedy. Only way out, if the gene age fails and we are back to spirituality, only way out then would be within spirituality to look at standardized substance and technique based management of affect instead of leaving it to the individual unique evolution kind of a situation. So it is spirituality which is based more on standardized substance and techniques, which in that situation would be a more efficacious alternative to a general open spirituality. Thank you.